morning, John.
Good morning, Brian.
We're back for another podcast.
I know, I love it. I'm so excited. I'm getting more comfortable doing this every single time we do it. So I want to do more and more. So this is super exciting.
Yeah, I am too. It feels a little weird talking into the microphone, but we're feeling the weirdness is starting to go away a little bit. Everything going all right on your end?
Yeah, so far. I think that one of the interesting things is just wondering how long this is going to go and trying to figure out how to regain a sense of normalcy in a world that's definitely changed forever in terms of what's going on. But overall, I mean, I can't complain too much. You know, I definitely feel like what we're focused on is helping us to deal with this. Having something to really work on and is helpful. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, every day is different. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I feel very similar. I feel like we have this coronavirus. It's changed everything. It's created a sort of a new normal for us. We've been in a sort of social distancing, isolation for a month and a half, which means that we've created a lot of new routines, and our life has taken on a sort of a new normal. But what's really not normal about it is the uncertainty about what the future holds, you know, and how we will come out of it and in what way we're going to come out of it. And I have this sort of, I don't know, working theory that a lot of people you can get used to almost anything, and you can handle difficult situations if they become normal and if your expectations about the future are sort of clear. But when you're expecting or you're thinking about the future and it's unclear, it creates a lot of anxiety. It creates a sense of uncertainty, and it could be fear. It depends. Different people react differently, but definitely there's anxiety that comes from not knowing what the future holds. And I think everybody is kind of in that place right now.
Yeah, totally. I think that's the thing that scares me the most is when I think about it, I have a hard time thinking clearly because I can't hang my hat on anything really as far as, well, what's going on with the rest of the world, because I feel like that dictates what we can count on as we push forward, right? So if I don't know what I'm really going to be capable of doing, even as we build this business or as I, work on anything, I'm like, where is this really going to go? And what am I basing it on? Is it the world as it is today or the world as it was 3 months ago? Will it go back to that? Can it go back to that? I feel like when you don't really know those things, it's hard to stay confident in what you're doing, even though it's whatever you're doing, it's probably the right thing. And if you're working on a business or your goals or dreams or just taking care of your family or all of the above, you plow forward with this sense of kind of like knowing where things are going. Right now, we don't have any idea where things are going. And I think that that's what messes with us psychologically is everything we're doing is probably the right thing, whatever it is. But because of that uncertainty of like, well, what's really going to be told to us on May 1st? Is everybody supposed to go back to work or and go back to their offices? Or are they supposed to find out that they're going to keep doing this? And then are you really okay with that? Because until you hear it, you don't know. It's all of that stuff. It's like all of these questions about how it's really going to be and what can we actually count on that throws you off. At least that's how I feel about it, because I don't know what really is influencing how everybody else is going to act. It's hard to know what to do yourself. That's my 2 cents on it in terms of why I think it's so disorienting. Even though it's not as bad as it seems, it's still very disorienting because of that fact.
Yeah, there's going along with what I was saying before about, how you feel about the future dictates sort of a lot about how much anxiety and stuff you have. You're in the same way, your situation today, for many people, their actual situation they're in today isn't really dictating how positive they feel about their life. It's what they think the future holds for them. If you're in a really bad situation, but the path forward looks like it's going to be really positive, you're going to feel optimistic and you're going to feel happier than if you look
Totally.
forward and you see a path that is just filled with, pain and misery, right? I think the path forward and having some view of that and having that view be positive is very important for people to create a sense of optimism and positivity in their lives. And I think it's a real challenge, depending on what you're dealing with. I think there are stories you can tell that are very positive. Like, for example, we will solve the coronavirus. Like, the question isn't whether we will solve it or not. It's just a question. It's a question of timing. But that question of timing is so uncertain that it makes it hard to speak about that with any confidence, right?
Yep.
So I find myself often dealing with this in terms of how, my wife and I speak about it, and how to emotionally deal with this big disruptive, force or obstacle or something that's been put in our way. And we have these ideas. For example, you and I started this company, and then now we have this giant coronavirus that we didn't anticipate when we were, getting started. And every company's in this boat, right? Every government, every company, every organization, and some are handling it better than others. And I think this whole idea of giant obstacles, that things that you can't control, is sort of the idea that I wanted to talk with you about today, because it's so present in my life, and I know it's present in everybody's life. And we talked before, the first couple episodes, it also feels kind of like a natural follow-on to me for what we've talked about, because the first couple episodes you're getting started and you're sustaining your momentum, and the natural thing that seems to follow on with that is like, well, what do you do when something stops your momentum, right? Like that's the
right.
and that thing could be all sorts of different stuff. It doesn't have to be a giant pandemic, but it just, the fact that we're living in one makes it feel very relevant to me today.
Yeah. No, I think it is a good topic to explore, and it has a great deal of relevance to everything that we talk about at Go Be More and everything that we talk about outside of Go Be More. One of the biggest challenges in life is dealing with things that you can't control, and you have all kinds of stuff that you want to do and all kinds of ideas and how you want things to go, but we don't tend to focus on or think about or plan for what could go wrong. It's hard because you don't want to think about it until you have to. And right now, we're having to think about a lot of stuff, aren't we? Even if we thought about it a little bit, boy, we sure didn't think about it in relation to a pandemic. So now, the thing that I like about the situation that we're in is that failure, challenges, obstacles, problems, setbacks, they all force you to do the thing that you need to do in order to get better. And that's what I feel like this pandemic is doing for us, as far as like what good can come out of it. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's definitely a very, very sad time for a lot of people, because they're losing loved ones, they're sick themselves, or they're struggling even more than they were before this all hit all of us. But that's not the whole story. That's not everything that the pandemic is. It's also an opportunity to find ourselves again. And, that's how I try to look at these moments in my life when I get my butt kicked. I go, well, what didn't I know before that led me to walking into that wall? Or what didn't I know before that led me to make these decisions that I obviously wouldn't make again? And how do I get better? And this is forcing us to look at, I think, kind of like our entire life,
Mm-hmm.
and every aspect of it, to not dwell on what we didn't do right, but to improve, to grow, and hopefully to do everything we can right now to really take care of our health, to really take care of ourselves. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't this always happen? Isn't there always something that comes up in our lives that kind of throws us for a loop? It's obviously not always going to be a pandemic, but it's going to be something like that. It's going to feel like that. And we're going to be forced to figure out how to better handle our lives and the things that we're dealing with, while trying to overcome that thing that we couldn't really control, and that we may never really be able to control, but we have to somehow work with it. That's what I think about now, especially because it's so obvious and in our face.
The thing that stood out to me there is that I think you're right. So coronavirus being the example that we're talking about now, and it's a nice one because it's literally affecting everybody in the world. Like it's something that everybody has their own experience with, but they can relate to it. But
isn't that crazy too? The thing
it is. It is really crazy actually to think that there's, no matter where you look in the world, this is top of mind for probably everybody in the world, right?
It's mind blowing to think that. Like it blows my mind to think that.
It's like the anti-World Cup, like everybody. I can only think of where they say that the whole world is watching is the World Cup, and in this case, it's every day, but it's a totally negative thing, right? We all have these. If you work in an industry, your industry might experience some kind of a shock, or if you're working in a company, your company might have some major crisis that it has to deal with that nobody else is dealing with, right? It's just you, or you have things in your life, major things, events happen that affect your family, or they affect your community, right? These happen all the time. We can't prepare for all of them. They could be natural disasters, they could be man-made disasters, they could be anything. And overcoming these is a challenge that we can't predict when we will have to face them, but we can predict that we will have to go through them at various points in our lives. Mm-hmm. So it's like not being able to know when it's going to happen is difficult, but knowing that they will happen should spur us to do the necessary preparation, even if that just means thinking about what would I do in this case, right? And
yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger talked about this on Jimmy Kimmel's Jimmy Kimmel's YouTube version of his late night show, and Arnold talked about that when he was governor of California. Actually, he was saying that I stockpiled, ventilators and masks and stuff like that just prior to, or because of it was like 2,000 or so like fires that broke out like overnight in California, throughout California while he was governor. And he said, the thing that I loved about what he was talking about in that interview was that he said, you just got to be prepared. Because I didn't know when something like this would happen, but I looked at things like this on our state, and I said, what can I do to better prepare us for when this happens? Because he says, more likely than not, it's going to happen. But he said, the one thing I don't like to do in life is not be prepared. Yeah. And so you're right. I think that preparing for these things that are inevitable, like challenges are going to happen in your life for sure. And some stuff you're never going to expect. I mean, I wish I could talk about everything that's ever happened in my life, but I know that I can't because it's just not topical. But in general, like there's stuff that has surprised me like crazy that I'm just like, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be dealing with that. Mm-hmm. And yet I am. And it's changed me forever. Some of those things, namely one of the most obvious things that it's easy to talk about is my kidney disease. I was shocked when I was told that I had it. I had no idea that I had it. And it changed the way that I looked at my life at that moment, and will continue to affect the way that I look at my life forever, And I was not prepared for that. And there's no way you can be prepared for that, but things like this happen to us all the time, and we are aware of that. So, I guess the idea is trying to prepare is important, but what do you do when it comes up and you can't do anything about it? You can't control the fact that it's there now. I don't know. That's why I think it's such an interesting thing to talk about. Even as we talk about it, I'm thinking about it and I go, gosh, there's so much that goes into that. It's not an easy thing,
Yeah, I think there's sort of two categories, right? Like there's the type of major problem that you can predict you will go through, which is some sort of business challenge. It could be some sort of, personal challenge, losing a loved one or something. We're all gonna lose loved ones at some point in our lives, right? Like you don't know when, but it's going to happen, and so that's a fact of life. And so that is something that typically you can in some way prepare for, right? Whether it's just emotionally or it's getting your things in order or something like this. But there's the one that you're talking about, a diagnosis of kidney disease, especially when you're a young Olympic athlete and you're like probably among the most fit people in the world, feeling invincible, doing things that 99.999% of people couldn't even dream of doing in terms of physical feats. And then the doctor comes in and says, oh, by the way, like you're dying. It's like, what? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense because it's so far outside of left field from what your daily experience is, right? It doesn't, it's not the kind of thing that anybody would say to you while you're training. Hey, have you ever considered planning for the possibility that you have XYZ disease? Like, that's not the way people think, and that's normal. It's not that people shouldn't think that way. I think, I think this is good because I think there are multiple kinds of these types of problems, right? And there's the ones that you can see clearly, and then there's the ones that you can't at all. That are just going to blindside you. And I wanted to get into this just a little bit and talk about some of these things about how we go about handling them, because I think I want to hear what you have to say about it. I know you've gone through a number of things, and then I've been trying to really work through this myself, and I think this is a great place to talk about some of what I'm thinking about, and some of the ideas might be good, and some of them might be just sort of, not as good, but that's fine. This is a chance to think about how to handle these situations a little bit better.
Well, what do you think about the coronavirus and how it's something that we can't control? Like, what's your take on it? Again, from our perspective, Timmy, we're two people that obviously are inclined to be optimistic, right? That's why we started an apparel brand based on, a slogan that's supposed to remind people to chase their dreams and to be optimistic and to challenge themselves to keep growing regardless of obstacles. In fact, to embrace the obstacles, right? So that they keep growing, because those things are always going to exist and come up in our lives, no matter how successful you are, right? So for you, as I consider you a successful person, I consider you a very intelligent, human being, in so many ways. And so how is it affecting how you look at your life and things right now? And are you scared about the future at all? Like, is it affecting your ability to move forward? And how are you overcoming that?
Yeah, gosh. So it does a couple things. One is it really highlights how much I don't know, and how hard it is to know anything, right? Because I do a lot of reading, and I read a lot of people who I think are way smarter than me about what they think about what's going on. And as a general rule, one of the things that I try to do, I'm not as good at doing it formally as I probably should, because I think really documenting this process is actually the right way to do it. But I try to make predictions about what I think is going to happen, and I try to think about how confident I am in those predictions, and then I try to see what comes up and check, and I use that thought process, that prediction process, as a way to judge how well am I understanding what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, I predicted a long time ago that this was going to get really bad, and it was going to explode, and everyone was going to be caught off guard. And but then what happened is that came true in America, and it didn't come true in Japan. So the fact that it didn't come true in Japan, where I live, where I was confident it was going to happen before America, that made me realize that, okay, there's just something that I'm missing here, that no matter what I'm reading, my prediction is wrong, right?
Right.
And in this case now, I look at it and say, well, it's easy to predict that the citizens of the United States, let's make it really broad, pockets of them or communities are going to get very restless and push very hard to open up the economy. It's easy, it's easy to predict because the U.S. doesn't have some of the safety nets or the resources for those communities that will allow them to just sort of stay in lockdown indefinitely, right? But I don't want to go down that path of judging any of that. But the feeling, all those things are predictable because they're driven from how people handle crises like this, like how you respond to them, and what your economic state is, what your personal situation is going to dictate your willingness to risk more versus risk less, right? I'm very blessed to be in a position where I can more or less stay in my house for a while and not really be at risk of like financial ruin, right? So, but many people aren't in that situation. And so I kind of went down a different path. That's not the thing that really, I think, has come home to me in this coronavirus is it does challenge how I predict and what I think is what I feel like I really understand about it and the world. But the other side of it is it really puts a lot of emphasis on controlling what I can control. The coronavirus is out there, but that doesn't mean there's nothing I can do. If I'm going to go outside, I can wear a mask. I can have hand sanitizer or disinfectant stuff with me. I can choose to go at a different time of the day than maybe there's going to be fewer people. I can choose where I'm going to spend my time if I'm going outside of the house. In a similar way, I can invest my efforts now on building some of those healthy routines that maybe I let slack off because I was overwhelmed. I was doing so many other things, and I was busy. So I wasn't maybe, one of the things I've been doing recently is I'm just running a little bit more than I used to, right? And I'm not training really hard, but I'm just sort of making a little bit more time to go out and exercise a little bit more frequently. And I can't control what's going to happen with how fast the coronavirus spreads in my community. I could do my part to try to minimize it from in my interactions, but I can focus on, my personal health a little bit more. I can focus on my family's personal health a little bit more. So yeah, I went on two different directions there, John. One of them is thinking about how I think about it and challenging how much I understand and building a habit of predicting what I think is going to happen and then checking back on that as a way of challenging, am I thinking about this situation correctly, right? And then the second thing is really focusing on what I can control and what I can't control.
Yeah, well, I think that that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think that when if you are just kind of thinking about like what could happen or what potential outcomes could be, you're preparing for that. And I think that we, in some way, shape, or form, we all do that. We're like, well, I think that this is what's going to be happening, and so this is what I need to do to prepare for that. Like, it's going to be this long before I can really go out and do stuff again or shop again, so I'm going to shop for the next 2 weeks. It's kind of like that kind of approach that you're taking to different aspects of your life in relation to what's kind of possible and what's probably not going to be possible based on how things are going to go for a while in terms of this is going to get worse before it gets better kind of a thing. I think that for me, I try to do similar things as well, like thinking ahead and saying, well, what can we be doing to prepare for like how it's going to be, and basing a lot of my actions day to day off of that. But yeah, I mean, as far as the coronavirus itself and just thinking about it as something that you can't control, I feel like it's important to dive even further into, like you said, the things that you can control and kind of like building into your day-to-day thoughts, like things that you're excited about and that you want to work towards, because we do need to do our part to help minimize something like a pandemic for sure. But I think that a big part of what makes life hard, especially in times like this for us as a global community, is when we're not really clear on our value and what we want out of life. And so I tend to turn to that even more when things get hard, because I'm like, well, wait, what am I excited about? What is it that I really want? And what can I do to start making some progress towards that? Because when you're not focused on that, I think you're focused on probably something a lot less positive. And that makes what is already hard way harder than it should be. So that's why I am always very quick to say, hey, what is it that you really want? What is it that you are excited about? What is it that's your dream? And dreams could be anything. You can label anything like, my dream is to have, an In-N-Out hamburger tonight. I mean, okay, that's a great dream that you probably can make come true. Just make sure you wear a mask when you go out and get it, and wash your hands and stuff. But I mean, I think that that's an important thing as it relates to this coronavirus thing, and that's what I've thought a lot about for myself and also for my daughter, for my family, my stepkids. I think about, well, what can we be doing to building up the idea of the future for them in terms of what they're excited about. So I talk about class of 2020, and while we did that big old speech on March 4th, talking about the speech that every senior needs to hear, I want them to know their value now, because things are always going to be hard, but you need to be reminded of your values so that you can work through those things, be motivated to work through those things. And so I try to be as practical as possible, but being a little bit on the impractical side as it relates to what you're thinking about, I think is not only healthy, but I think it's a necessity, because there's a lot of things outside of your home that you can't control that are also irrelevant to the overall progression of your own personal growth. Like, you can't control the coronavirus, but you can control how you handle the situation, and choosing to be motivated and focused and driven and doing things that contributes to that is, I think, one of the best things that I've been able to do for myself. and in terms of keeping Gobi more top of mind and growing as a healthy business and apparel brand, but more importantly as a dad, as a friend, as a person. I'm like, people can kind of turn to me and I'm gonna lift them up. You know, like it's just like living in a place where it's like kind of cloudy all the time. Like you're looking for the sun. I kind of want to be the sun, you know, for people. I want people to find some warmth and comfort and encouragement when they look at me and when they talk to me, or if they follow me on social media. I'm trying to figure out how to use social media specifically to be a resource of positivity that's genuine and authentic to who I am. And, you know, the coronavirus thing, it's done that for me even more. So I've been given more time to figure out how I really want to show up, and also to clarify for myself who I really am. You know, doing that is helpful, I think, for other people to do the same thing. Who are you and what can you contribute right now? You know,
I think that is really great. I think there's an aspect of how we feel when we're dealing with something that feels out of our control. A lot of how we feel is based off of what we're choosing to put our attention to, right? And so one of the actual things that I've done over the last couple weeks maybe is I've actually reduced how much I'm reading about the coronavirus or how much news I'm following about it.
Me too. It's crazy, but boy, that was kind of getting to me.
Yeah, and it wasn't getting to me it was like every article I wanted to read it. I'm actually still, I'm intensely curious about what's going on in all these different places, and as an academic exercise, like I want to know and I want to spend my time on it. And yet what I found is that it is a fundamentally, like the majority of the stories are somewhat negative, because it's a crisis that so many people are going through, and those are the stories that are being told, and there aren't a ton of great updates every day. And the more I was reading, the more generally I was feeling sort of negative. My baseline went down in terms of like feeling a little bit negative, but that was affecting everything else I was doing.
It's food for thought. It's like you're eating. What is your mind being fed? You know, and when they say food for thought, I mean literally everything that you're thinking about is food for your mind, because your mind is hungry for information. It's always on and it's always going. But that's what I feel like. It's like you can only eat so much candy before you start to get sick. You know,
Yep.
a piece of gum is cool, or, you know, a Snickers bar is cool, you know, but boy, I tell you what, if you eat the whole box, you're probably not going to be too happy with yourself, you know, like regardless of the fact that it's cool and candy in general is okay, or whatever it is, it's cool. But you can't overindulge that specific thing. Even positive stuff, it's like, okay, I mean, at some point you got to like balance it all out. Everything, this balance is key, you know, but that's what I was getting with this whole the information thing. I'm like, man, I need to know what's going on, but boy, I know a little bit too much about what's going on, and this is not helping me. In fact, it's making me feel a little bit paranoid, a little bit sick, and honestly, not very optimistic, and that's not helpful. So I kind of need to feel like you need to go in a little bit, get a little bit of information, and then get out for a while.
Yes.
Just a little bit. We were just being overly inundated, all of us, with this information. And boy, yeah, it will make you sick. I promise you, you know?
So one of the other things that I have this strategy, and I'm going to tell you this, and I'm kind of laughing already because my wife doesn't really get it, and she thinks it's kind of silly. But this is sort of one of my strategies for dealing with big life challenges, or things that are sort of, for lack of a better word, like unfair or unpredictable, hard to manage.
Okay, I'll try not to laugh.
Yeah, well, it's fine. You can laugh. So I have always encountered these problems, and one of the things what I do is I take a step back and I pretend like I'm in a video game, and I just pretend like I'm playing a video game, and my body is like my avatar in the video game. Like whatever I'm feeling, it's not me, it's my body's feelings. It's whatever, like those are different. Those are the inputs that I'm getting from the video game, right? And the problem that I'm trying to deal with is, it's like the equivalent of whatever the challenge is on the level of the video game. Like whatever we're doing. Like in this case, you know, the video game right now has me living in Japan. I've got a family, and I've got this coronavirus outside, and I'm building a company, and how am I going to advance past this level, right? Like how am I going to get past this? Maybe I don't go to this detail, but scoring the most points or defeating the challenge or whatever. But the reason I think about this stuff this way is because it allows me to have what I guess I would call like a healthy detachment from it, to be able to look at it and say, well, how would I think about this if I wasn't so emotionally invested in it, right? How would I approach this if it was something that I knew had a solution, but it was just up to me to figure out what it is, right? Because in a video game, there's always a solution. Somebody programmed the video game, and there's always a way past the level. There's always a way to do something, and if you know it's there, you can keep experimenting and keep trying things and keep doing things, and they're gonna fail. Like, I don't know. I'm not even a video gamer, so I don't play tons and tons of games, but I grew up playing a lot of them, right? And the whole thing is, your experience playing video games is mostly dying at the end of each level, right? And so, but my attitude about it is, you go through and you figure out how to play these levels better and how to get a better strategy. And beyond that, though, it's like, how does the world of the video game work? What is the internal logic of the video game? And once you understand how video games have been designed, you can start thinking through how to better beat them. So I take this sort of attitude of, well, okay, it seems like the coronavirus, for example, has these rules, right? The logic is based like this, right? And if this is the way the logic of the coronavirus works, then what would be the best solution to get past this level? And then if that solution makes me feel some sense of anxiety, I look at it and say, okay, well, so part of executing the solution is going to have to be dealing with this anxiety, because that's obviously, I'm feeling it just thinking about it, right? So the reason I do it is I'm going to tell a story actually right now for you from when I was working at Apple. So I worked at Apple for 7 years, and Apple is an amazing place to work, but it is not a stress-free environment, right? It is a high stress environment many days. And we used to joke that I worked on the 4th floor, and I would get to work and I would get in the elevator or get to the bottom of the stairs on the 1st floor, heading up to my cubicle, on the 4th floor. And from the 1st floor to the 4th floor, I would feel my blood pressure rise, because the minute I got off the elevator, I didn't know what was going to hit me that day. And I didn't know what kind of, emergency fire I was going to have to put out. So this is the way it felt there. And actually, to be perfectly honest, I kind of liked it, because I felt like I had to be on my game every day, right? And I was good at what I did there. But the thing that I had to overcome in that job was that I was working with and for people who were making lots of decisions for reasons that I wasn't included in understanding, right? I would get somebody, some director or VP would come down and say, I need X, Y, and Z by this time. And I wouldn't know why. I would just have to sort of do it, right? And I would have to sort of change everything I was doing, put everything aside and start on the new thing. And do it without making mistakes, because if you make mistakes, it affects everybody's decision making. It affects how they think about you as somebody they can trust to go to for the information. My whole job was to give people high quality, well formatted, prepackaged information so they could make decisions, right? So it's kind of like, I don't want to make any mistakes doing it. And one of the ways I started to approach it was to think of it like a video game. Because I would have a manager who might be sort of micromanaging what I was working on. I would have, somebody higher up than them who was asking for inputs or changing things or doing things. And I would have, 200 other people I supported who would be coming by my desk randomly asking me for things while I'm in the middle of trying to do my work. And trying to balance all these things was a unique challenge every day. And I started to just look at it as a video game. As, okay, today's level, I don't know what I have to accomplish, but the goal is to get through without making any mistakes, right? Without screwing anything up. And it allowed me to sort of detach a little bit from, okay, this manager is micromanaging me and I don't really like it. But the reality of that experience, I don't have to get emotionally caught up in that experience. If I just assume, if I look at it from the standpoint of, he's doing what he's doing because he's got some internal logic that's programmed him that way to do it, and I just have to sort of navigate it, right? Like I don't want to get caught up in being overly emotionally connected to this stuff that I don't like. Anyway, so this was my sort of strategy, and I sort of adopt this, what I call it, like a sort of a healthy detachment for how to think about these challenges that we can't really overcome, right? That we can't change it. It's outside of our control, but we are forced to deal with it. And so one of my strategies is to take that situation and try to separate myself from it and look at it as if, is this something that I can manipulate, right? Is it something that I can navigate and make the most of it. Make it as productive as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
You can hear my daughters in the background getting their clothes. So
no, it's so great. I love it. I was gonna say, like, that's what's so cool about doing these things, these podcasts at home and stuff. Is the dogs are barking, or the cats jumping on your keyboard, or
exactly.
Who knows? That's why I think it's so cool. Just keeping it authentic and real. It's an interesting way to look at it, for sure, Bryan, because it made it easier for you to create a framework within which to set yourself up for more success, because that worked for you, that way of looking at the situation that that you're describing. And I think that that's probably a great way to look at the coronavirus situation. There are definitely some things that I want to highlight as far as like things to do, but gosh, what a great analogy. I think we should talk more about that and explore that, because creating those different types of frameworks where you can kind of like become like the gamer, right? The person who's in control, like you could take more control over what you can't control, but be okay with it. Like there's certain things that you just have to work with, right? And you're like, well, what is it? How do I work with it? How do I make it work? It's like, you can't change that at the end of the video game, or at the end of each level, there's probably certain obstacles or challenges that you're going to have to overcome because it's been programmed into the game. And so there's certain rules and certain things that you can do to overcome those things, but you have to follow those rules, and you have to do certain things that are programmed into the game in order to beat that level and ultimately at some point beat the game. I think that life is a lot like that as well. And so I think it's actually a great analogy to use to frame dealing with the coronavirus in general. And also taking something that's very heavy and very dark and making it light as well, making it lighter.
No, there's a good aspect to that, because honestly, you can joke about a video game. You can't beat it for reasons that feel unfair, or it just doesn't seem like it doesn't make any sense why it doesn't work. You can kind of joke about it, but when you feel like, oh my God, this is my life, it could feel oppressive, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the areas where I really like the approach, because it gives a framework for accepting, for lack of a better word, when something is unfair but outside of your control. Your parents always say to you, life isn't fair, right? Like it's like there's always going to be a situation where at some point you're told life isn't fair. And that's true. It's not fair. And for me, looking at things like a video game or something and saying, well, it's not fair, but there's still some strategy that I can employ to get the most out of this, and to try to, in my like video game, like beat the level or score the most points or do the best I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that for the most part, I think that that's a great analogy. I hope that more people will kind of take that approach and say, how can I basically become the hero in my story? How can I kind of take over the telling of my story? I think that's why I love the retelling of the Gingerbread Man as we've done with Go Be More. I think that a big part of that is I see all of us in the Gingerbread Man character, and I also saw in the framework of the story this way of telling our story in a very inspirational, and also in a way that kind of gives you this guidance of saying, okay, see these characters in this way as obstacles, each character representing a different obstacle, and see how the Gingerbread Man went beyond accepting what he was made to be, which was just a cookie, and doing something more than what anybody would ever expect a cookie to do, right? And I see that in this analogy as well, where it's about becoming the author of your story and finding something that empowers you to tell the story that you want to live out, right? Yes. So with the coronavirus, I would love for all of us to see ourselves as heroes in this story, not as victims, as people that are fighting back, not getting beaten up by this thing that's forcing us to evolve and change the way in which we live our lives, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? But how we see it is going to determine what we get out of the situation. Because one of the things I warn people about when I give these virtual talks is I said, you sure as heck are going to be really, really mad at yourself if you wasted any extra time that you do have. I don't know what everybody's daily schedule is, but I feel like it's a lot more open than it was before in terms of moments in your life to actually work on yourself, to work on things that you've put off, from relationships to dreams to businesses, right? and or new hobbies that you're super passionate about that you just weren't able to find a way to carve out time. You're going to be so mad if all of this stuff, this time that you had, whatever amount it is, even if it's an extra hour, that's more than enough to really alter the way in which you live and also what you get out of as far as enjoyment from your life. I honestly believe that. So I tell people, don't let this moment be a moment that you look back on and say, gosh, I didn't do anything with the extra time that I had to get somewhere with something that I really wanted to work on and that I felt like before the pandemic hit and before lockdowns really were put in place, I didn't work on. That's very, very likely for a lot of people. And if anything, it's like that's one of the biggest messages I want to get out there is don't waste this time, whatever time you do have to improve yourself. So that's why I think telling yourself this story differently and saying, what can I do, almost puts you in a position of being proactive and saying, okay,
Yes.
I'm going to dictate how I handle this situation that I can't control in ways that I can. And so I'm going to tell myself that I'm the hero in the video game. I'm going to find a way to beat this thing as it relates to my life and my immediate circle's lives, right? And I'm going to look at the rules and I'm going to find a way to work within the rules of this new game in order to beat it and come out the victor, to come out and show myself, to prove to myself that I'm the hero in the story that's now being told about my life in this particular chapter of my life. I think it's a wonderful analogy, and I think that it's a great one that I'm actually going to use. I'm going to say, well, okay, wait a minute. How do I play this game better? You know, it's a fun analogy. I think it's a really good one, and I'm glad that you shared it.
Well, there's this thing too that when I don't know if you've read about some of these great, like say tech CEOs or, so Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or some of these people, one of the things that they all seem to have in this internal, like just understanding, this innate understanding of is that their actions can change not just their daily experience, but the world as a whole. And I think actually that's the other thing about this, which I think makes the idea of thinking through this as separating yourself out from it and thinking about it from a video game standpoint is it's not just to deal with a shitty situation that you can't change. That's actually not what it is. The whole concept is if you take a step back and really look at it, you can find lots of points that you can make a difference and change, right? And some of those are just navigating the thing that's not going to change. Like you take some part of your experience and say, I'm not even going to bother trying to change that. I'm just going to navigate my way around it in the most effective way. And that's the best strategy for that aspect of my life. But there are other areas. And I hope that anybody listening to this and people all over the world are looking at their community or their world and saying, you know what? We could make some small changes here and it would make a really big impact. And if this, if you want to keep on the video game analogy, if this were a video game and I did this, what would happen? How much would that make everybody's life better in this way? And if you can find those points, by all means, that's exactly what you should be doing, right? That's winning the level of the video game. It's not only defeating sort of the level, but it's almost like changing the video game. We have some ability to change the video game that we're playing. We don't always have a lot of ability. Sometimes the best we can do is just navigate what's being thrown at us, and that is perfectly fine. But when you see the opportunity to literally change the video game, that's such a huge opportunity to go and pursue, right? And especially if you are going to make that experience better for you or for your family or for your community or for, your friends, whatever it is, for your company. I actually do feel it forces you into a proactive mindset and in some way empowering mindset where you're not just a pawn in the game, you're an active player who is affecting the way everybody else plays the game as well.
Yeah, I love it, Bryan. I love it. And we have I think we're going to shoot for an hour today in our podcast, you guys. So we have about 10 minutes left. And what I want to do with the last 10 minutes is I want to take about 5 minutes and just, if you can too, Bryan, just list off some common things that come up in life that we can't control. We'll do the best to come up with a list on the spot here because this is not something that I had actually written down a whole bunch of examples. I mean, I'll share some personal examples as well, but I want to just take a couple minutes to do that and then give you guys some pointers as far as things that I've used in my life to help me handle situations that have come up and my journey where I had to figure out how to deal with things that have come up that I cannot control or
Right.
change. I think that
Right.
that's another way of saying it too. Things you can't change, whether it's in people or in life, and learning how to work with that is something that I want to highlight over the next, in our final 10 minutes here.
So let me give a few, because I'll just go off the top of my head. I have a few things, right? One is chronic diseases, conditions. I suffer from a few. It doesn't have to go into all of them, but these are things that they're never going to go away. It is what it is. I just have to deal with them. And I think these are areas where how we think about them and getting them and navigating them makes a lot of sense. Another type of obstacle you have to navigate in this sense that people's personalities, the people that are in our lives, whether they're our families, they're our coworkers, they're our friends, there's some amount of people's personalities that change and there's some that aren't. And I have somebody close to me whose son has some, I don't know if it's a learning disability or if it's just emotional sort of immaturity, some other issues that he's struggling with. And this is something that, it might be something that we can control, but it's not something we can change in a day. It's the kind of thing that requires a very different perspective on what type of expectations you're setting, how you want to navigate those things. And I think we encounter these all the time with the other people in our lives. Navigating those is really difficult. And these are big obstacles that can really affect how we perform. Another one that comes to mind from experience with people I know and is addiction. People get it when you get addicted to things. It feels like you can't change that when you're in the middle of it. And the process is not I'm just going to change. It requires a lot of work to come out of something like that. And if you're dealing with any of these type of areas, these chronic conditions, addiction, or you have people in your lives who have a problem that they can't solve immediately. I mean, these come top of mind. I don't know if you have anything else that you've thought of.
No, I mean, I guess that those are the top ones. I mean, I was just thinking in general, like when you're in a relationship and you're struggling in that relationship, trying to understand, maybe there's differences between you and the other person, and you get hyper focused on things that you would like to see them do differently. I think that's, if you focus on it, again, people don't really change. They can evolve and improve and mature, but who they are at the core and how they're going to show up is pretty much going to remain the same, especially when you see that, honestly, even we have kids. I see who my kids are, know, and I'm like, as a parent, I'm like, I want to embrace and celebrate who they are instead of trying to change who they are and how they're showing up and how they're handling or acting towards people or certain things. Instead, I want them to feel like they can improve and grow and be the best version of themselves instead of trying to change them. I just want to nurture who they are and leave room for growth. And so I think that's a big one for me is recognizing that you can't control other people and who they are and how they're going to show up. That's the number one that I would like to just at least put out there to think about. Embrace who others are, because you want to be embraced for who you are. Yourself. Just think about it from your own perspective. You are trying to improve the way you react to certain things or say certain things or do certain things, and you're working on it and you're not there, but you're a work in progress, but people keep beating you up about it in one way, shape, or form. Well, it kind of discourages you from wanting to improve and grow, because you're like, well, wait, can't you see that I'm trying, kind of a thing. Well, that's the same thing for other people too. Even if you don't think that they are, I guarantee you they are. So I think that's a big one, is trying to let go of trying to change other people and control how people are, especially those that are closest to you, because those are the ones that need that type of acceptance and understanding and patience more than anybody else that you may just randomly meet here and there. It's embrace and support the ones you love for who they are. And that's a big control one that I know of and that I work on every day as well.
I 100% agree with that. And I realize now that my sort of video game mindset approach, I have often used that to deal with people who I wasn't super close with, like as if they're all the other people. I'm close with them. I might be friends. They might be in my environment, what I'm doing. I honestly don't really apply it much in the sense of like with my wife or with my kids, as much as I don't know. Maybe I'll go back and think about it a little bit more, because the same logic holds. They have an internal logic that they're operating off of. If I can sort of understand what that is and learn how to navigate that and not get emotionally caught up in the fact that I disagree with some of it, or that I don't like some of it, or that their default is not what I want their default to be, right? These kind of, and I'm trying to control those things never works. Like you and I have had this conversation, offline before, but you never get yourself more frustrated than when you're trying to change somebody that you love and they're not changing, right? Like it doesn't lead to anything good. You have to sort of figure out how to accept them and guide them to where you want to go. You can't just tell them they need to change, right?
Yeah.
So
I have one more thing I want to say
it.
about that, and then let's say goodbye to everybody today.
Sure, go for it.
So the thing that I feel like I've gotten out of this conversation is this: how you look at the things that you can control and the things that you can't change dramatically changes the way that you feel about it. Dramatically. I think that it's really a really fun idea to get really positive about what it is that is kind of kicking your butt a little bit and embracing it for what it is. I think the number one thing that I could say, there were so many things that I wanted to go down, like the idea of turning things that are lemons and making lemonade, and the idea and concept of giving up and instead of fighting and trying to change stuff, like all these different ideas. I definitely want to share more of that and go over that. But I think the number one thing that I'm getting out of this is accepting things for how they are and just looking at it, trying to look at it more positively, seeing the other side of it, because there's the side that obviously shows up as a challenge and something that you need to overcome and something that you want to change. But letting go of that desire for just a second and saying, well, what if I didn't do that? What if I just embraced it? What if I accepted it? And what if I just looked at it and said, how can this help me? How can I use this to help me improve my life? I wonder what that would do for you. And I think that it's a fun exercise to try with something super, super simple, like doing a push-up. We're always going to talk about doing one push-up, but people want to get in shape. Most people are out of shape. And I want to see more people just doing a push-up. Why? Because if you can overcome the idea of, I want to be super fit, to, I want to just do one push-up, and doing that is just as great as getting into great shape because you overcame the inertia of getting started, man, that's fantastic, And that's just changing your perspective in terms of the desire that you have, which is the six-pack, to just doing a push-up. And it's honestly, I think, in the same ballpark. I think it's the same. So changing your perspective, finding the positive side of it, whatever you can't change or control, I think that that's a great step to take in terms of handling things like a pandemic.
That's right. A pandemic, our relationships, our challenges at our job. I think that it applies to all of these things that we can't really overcome. Jon, it was really great. Actually, I really enjoyed this conversation. This went off in very, very different directions than I expected, but I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the great conversation. And
thank you too, Bryan. Thank you, man. Always.
For all of you listening, you can find the links to any of the articles or references in our show notes. You can like and subscribe on iTunes, and by all means, you can send us feedback on the podcast. We'd love to hear what you think, and we'd love to keep improving this and cover topics that you guys are interested in hearing. For Jon, I'm Bryan. We are what the world is chasing, and we hope this podcast helps you become what the world is chasing too.